So, welcome back, Dalton. We're going to be talking about the hero's journey and the second part of the hero's journey. And we last time we were together, we talked about the first phase of Joseph Campbell's work with the hero's journey, where there's a separation from the ordinary and whatever that ordinary or normal is. And this second phase has a lot of different names to it. It could be the dark night of the soul, going into the wood or into the crucible or the belly of the whale. So there's been a lot of different phrases that have talked about or described this phase, but it really is this idea of initiation. And so when you think of being a coach and having your own journey and your own research that you've done, when you think of initiation, like what comes to mind, that idea or the concept of initiation?
Yeah. Well, when you think about how difficult actually answering the call is, right? Like, looking back, answering the call is really, truly making the decision to go on the journey, right. Whether that's to achieve a high level of success in sports, whether it's get a college degree, move across the country, whatever the decision is that you're making, is the commitment, yeah. Right? And secretly, that it's not going to be easy, that that there's going to be things along the way. So. Right. When I think of the initiation aspect, I just think of, the slow drip of discomfort that will come, that you have to find. You have to start to deal with the process of embracing those challenges. As a coach, I think of, when you say you want to do something, it's like that first day you wake up at 5 a.m. and nobody else is awake, right. And you go, maybe I don't want this, right? Or you wake up and you say, I want this, right? Then then you really answered the call. And that's where I guess I would say is like, if you wake up in the morning and you question it, maybe you still haven't answered the call, but in the way that it's described as this is where the doubt creeps in, and this is where the uncertainty creeps in and stuff like that. And then, going into more of sports examples is like, your loss, how you deal with the loss. Like, I've been training, I've been doing these things, I'm trying to get to this goal, and now I lost. Right. It's not possible. Right. Those types of things. Yeah.
So that reminds me when you're talking about that way, that morning of that first practice or whatever it may be, and one of the thoughts that came to me was not do I want this or not, but can I do this, or how bad is it going to be? Well, maybe not how bad it's going to be the first time. It's when you return for a second season or return again, you know what you're getting yourself into. But that question, at least for me, I think one of the ones came to me, it wasn't necessarily did I want this as much was can I do this? Yeah. Am I going to have what it takes to do this? Which also then leads me to another piece, and because I think the element of the call is this cognitive part, right? It's in our thinking. We haven't really taken any action yet. It's all in our thinking, and but also as we get closer to accepting that call or moving across that threshold, there are going to be individuals who are what they refer to as the gatekeeper, and that may be that parent that's concerned about you getting hurt, or are you sure you want to do that, or they may have their own stuff and they want you to stay in ordinary. Yeah. Maybe it's because of their own fears. Maybe it's because they never were initiated themselves. Maybe it was because they've gone through the process and they've seen the pain of it and or whatever. But or it may be someone who is just that sabotager. And so either way, whatever, there's almost always going to be some gatekeeper that is going to plant a seed of doubt. And you're already, at least for me, there was always that element of, am I sure? I don't know. And I think that's a normal or a natural part of it, because if I knew, well, then I probably wasn't on the right path anyways. There was no fear that was coming up. There was no angst. I already knew what the outcome was going to be.
Yeah.
So can you think, when you think of gatekeepers, right? And this is before we even get into the initiation part. But when you think of gatekeepers, what, as a coach now, and having been involved with the sports or even in other aspects of life, talk a little bit about that person who may served as a gatekeeper.
Well, it's tough because it doesn't seem like there's people that are standing in the door saying you can't enter, right? Mm-hmm. But there are so many potential distractions or temptations to pull you away from what your call was, mm-hmm. Whether that's friends that don't share the same call, right? Like you can't go in the journey. You can't go on the journey with your friends.
Right.
Your friends are not allowed to go on the journey with you, but they're going to be constantly next to you in the reality of our lives, trying to tell you to come do things that are not a part of the journey. Mm-hmm. So I think about friends a lot. Mm-hmm. I lost a lot of friends, mm-hmm. but I gained great friends, mm-hmm. friends that respected the process that I was putting myself into. Mm-hmm. Some people would call and say, things, and it was a moment. Those are the moments where I said, "Oh, these are not people that I want." Right. I was pretty connected to my call, mm-hmm. so it was like really easy to point out and say, "Oh, you don't want me to do this. Therefore, I'm not really cool with you anymore." Mm-hmm. And there, you talk about relationships, girlfriends or boyfriends, mm-hmm. And I didn't do well with this, because now you're talking about another level of like how intoxicating love is, mm-hmm. How intoxicating, that lust, that youthfulness of lust, it's more distracting than social connection with mm-hmm. your friends and peers and stuff like that. I also think you hit something like parents. I heard a parent once come up to me, and for whatever reason, this parent is still involved in my reality as a coach. But he once told me that, as I was telling him, if he wants to be good at wrestling, he has to do a lot of stuff to be good at wrestling. Mm-hmm. And the parent said, "Yeah, well, there's there's more important things in life. Life's not about just spending all your time training, Mm-hmm. And I was like, how unfortunate that he's not realizing that no. You only get 4 years in high school sports to try to be the best high school athlete. Mm-hmm. So you got the rest of your life to do whatever you think he's supposed to be doing now, right. And you're just encouraging him not to be initiated. You're pulling him away from the call. You're pulling him away from the initiation process. Yeah. And so those are types of distractions that I think are gatekeepers, because that might not be a door that says you can't enter, right. But like you're talking about emotional control. And I think as a young person, when you get called the most, right? When you're young, the most difficult thing for you to do is to make the call, and yet you are not developed enough to be aware of all of these things that are potentially getting in your way. Mm-hmm. For me, the fact that I've done this, and now I've gotten older, and I've seen where I failed and where I didn't answer the call when I should have, mm-hmm. where I didn't have the right people around me. Now I'm so aware of those obstructions that I feel unstoppable now, because anything that comes up, I see it mm-hmm. before it starts. Mm-hmm. Where when you're young, or or say this is your first journey or accepting first journey of acceptance, like you have no idea what the demons look like.
Right.
But now, as you get older, you can spot them out.
Yeah. And I think, I think it's important, that, as we've talked before about the idea that when you have that nudging, that curiosity, that wanting to step out and do something different than what you've done, or have, I think you talked about one time of having really big goals, not realistic goals, but like really big goals. And that idea, that's all part of stepping into a new territory, because to either be, a state champion or national champion, there's certain things you're going to have to do. It's not going to come easy. And I think that's all part of first accepting it, and then now going into this idea of initiation. And I think as we start talking about this idea of initiation, or this dark night of the soul, or this crucible where you have an opportunity now to face certain fears, and whatever those fears are. Maybe I don't know if I can handle the practices. Maybe I don't know if I'm smart enough to do this in school, or will they accept my idea, or whatever it is. But what am I going to do to find out if I do have what it takes? And then, like in sports, hopefully you have that coach who can serve as a mentor, and those assistant coaches that can serve as mentors to show you how to get through it. What are those little things that you can do to make it not necessarily easier, but how do you get through that piece? And then how, once you get through that, then you start developing your own strategies on whatever it is. Maybe in wrestling or in bodybuilding, it was about how losing body fat or losing weight to make a weight, or training when you don't feel like training, or you're distracted by other things. How do you get focused and just show up even if you don't feel like it? And I think those are all important things that, we may be talking about sports, but those are the same things that are going to be important when you're working in your career. If you're a parent and you get woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning and your kid is throwing up, you show up. That's what you do, because there's something bigger than you that needs you to step up and have that character,
Yeah. Now you bring up a lot of good points, and this is why I think whether it's bodybuilding or powerlifting or sports or for some people academics, I guess, it's so important to understand how important these things are, because it's the first time you're dealing with those fears or the lack of confidence. I haven't been confident my entire life. This has been built. And, the first time I made an ambitious goal, I doubted it. And, when I felt that fear or the doubt, I used it as a mini battle, like a mini fight. So if I felt like I wasn't going to win, I went out and trained so that I could fight that feeling that I wasn't going to win.
Right.
So for whatever reason, when those battles presented themselves for me, that's what I would do. I would look at them as opportunities to wake up and just go for a run. I didn't feel like it. I was like, I'm just going to go, right? Because I figured that if you could do that, then you could get stronger.
Right.
And in college, I learned a lot about this idea of like getting your mind right, because when the training's even elevated, like you throw everything away. You're like, I don't care about goals. I don't care about anything. All I want to do is stop doing all this training, right? Because it's so hard and everybody's so demanding. And I remember this is like a traumatic experience, but it was very helpful for me because I loved training. Like training was fun, and I always enjoyed like pushing yourself. I always thought that like if you can break your body, like if you can make your body quit, but your mind is still ready to go, like then you did your job. And I remember our practice. We had like a 2-hour wrestling practice, hard college Division I wrestling practice, and then we did sprints, right? And coaches are like, all right, get your shoes on and go over to the Armory. And at the University of Illinois, the Armory is the track, the indoor track. And so we just finished up this high-level, hard wrestling practice with conditioning there, and then we went over to the Armory to do 20 200-meter sprints. And these aren't just 200-meter sprints at your own pace, right? They're timed, and if you don't go fast enough, there's 30, 40 of them, so, and it's not just, then there's the social component, right? Like, if you cause 10 more, nobody's really big fans of you, right? So there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of doubt, and then, the coaches are just saying, hey, get your mind right, get back to the line, and focus on the next one. Mm-hmm. Don't think about how many you have. Just focus on the next one.
Right.
So that type of stuff has always helped me. Like, whenever these things present, just battle that thing, mm-hmm. and stay focused on battling that thing. Mm-hmm. And then once you get a little bit further, then you get a little bit further.
Mm-hmm. So here's something I'm going to throw out. It's a little bit off from what we were talking about with the sports, but this just came up just recently. I was over here with my wife talking to one of her friends, and it's Christmas time, and it's got all this stuff going, getting ready for Christmas, and so we're a week out of Christmas, and because my wife's the planner, and she's the artist and does everything and stuff like that, and she made a comment. She goes to her friend, she goes, it's 3 years ago today, my dad died. And her dad, my father-in-law, died suddenly. It was one of those, Diane was having a conversation with her an hour earlier, with a conversation with him an hour earlier on the phone, and then we get a phone call an hour later that he collapsed, and he probably died before he hit the carpet, right? And had no signs, no indication of what was going on. And she remembers that. She was reflecting on that, and she said to her friend, I don't know how I did it back then, how I got everything together, but if I can get Christmas and do Christmas then in the midst of my dad dying, doing his funeral, then this will be easy. Yeah. And it's what we said earlier about once you start seeing the hero's journey, in this case we're talking about the initiation, you see it everywhere. I didn't say anything at the moment. I was just reflecting on what Diane had said to her friend Bridget. But that, knowing she went through that experience, knowing that she faced that challenge of her father dying in the midst of her grief, and still wanting to do Christmas and having family, and still wanting some family rituals to be able to be there, that 3 years later, even though whatever she's feeling, she's behind and the house looks beautiful to me, it doesn't really matter, but that she knows in the back of her mind she'll be able to pull it off, because she's pulled it off under harder circumstances, under more difficult circumstances, and for her, the most difficult circumstance. And when you said that story about what those coaches were showing you to do through that initiative of this intense workout and then all these sprints, that when you don't feel like you got anything left and you're wrestling against the guy and you still have 20 more seconds and you can pull off a win, you just focus on those 20 seconds, and so I think that is the beauty of initiation. And when we don't have initiation, right, then we don't know. We may bend to going softer. We may bend into, because no one really knows that we have still something left in the tank. We do, though. We know. I mean, I remember, played in football for Harlem back in the 80s was not necessarily enjoyable experience if everything was based on if you won or not, and because we lost more than we won. But what was worse for me than losing, what was worse than that was that I knew that I didn't give 100%. That would keep me up all night, because then for some reason I believed that the whole loss was based upon me, and even though that's not rational. So my conclusion under those circumstances was, no matter what, you just give 100%. You make sure that you haven't left anything on the field. It doesn't matter what the scoreboard says. I'm playing to not have that feeling of regret.
Yeah.
And I think that I know that led later when I was competing in bodybuilding. I tell a strawberry story. About waking up in the middle of the night. I was getting ready for the Mr. USA, and it was the middle of July, and I was starving, and wasn't actually starving, but just felt like I was starving. and I woke up, and because you drink a bunch of water, so you don't feel the hunger pains when you go to bed, which of course is stupid because then 2 hours later you got to wake up to go to the bathroom. so I go to the kitchen, and it's like super pitch black, right? I mean, it's just nothing, and I navigate through, and I go in the refrigerator, and I don't know why, because what was I going to do? I couldn't eat anything, but I open up the refrigerator, and the whole kitchen's illuminated, right? And on the top rack is this cauldron of strawberries that my mom had, because I was 18 at this time, and I was living with my parents, and she had put these. They were just there, ready to, for the next day or whatever we were going to eat them, and I know because of dieting that strawberries barely have any calories at all. And I started in my mind figuring out how I could take a strawberry off there and then move the other strawberries around so that no one would see, like anyone cared. But and I started navigating like I was going to do that. And then it dawned on me, if I take one strawberry, which is about 4 calories, if even, that'll be the reason why I lose the USA. That would be the reason why I place low. And so I was like, shut the refrigerator door, because a strawberry wasn't worth that feeling later of regret, or knowing that I only gave 99%, not 100%. And I think those things are all part of what happens in the initiation phase.
They present themselves.
Yeah. The coaches put you in a situation so that you can train and that you can push yourself beyond what you think you can do, or beyond what you think you're capable of doing. And then you are now telling yourself a new narrative.
Yeah.
That's then going to be beneficial for other situations.
Yeah. So how do you think, because this is something as a coach I'm trying to figure out, because when we talk about the hero's journey and we talk about starting with the call, mm-hmm. right? The call for me is like, well, kids went out for the sport.
Yep.
Okay. Well, that's a call. They answered the call.
Yep. They crossed the threshold because they came on the mat.
They came, yeah. And so now, how do you create, like, is it only due to goals that you think about that end result so much? Because, I mean, how many people in that situation go, oh yeah, this is a good strawberry, or they think, oh no, this will be the reason why I lost. Now it's my enemy. Now I don't like strawberries because they're trying to, ruin my victory.
Well, it's not the strawberry. It's me thinking I can get away with it.
Of course.
And so that's the other thing. It's the enemy isn't.
But you
out
didn't
there.
think that. Because you stopped doing it.
Well, the enemy was me thinking I could get away with something. That's the enemy. That's the dragon.
Yeah.
It's not the strawberry.
Of course.
Yeah. It's and I think that's where when we're inviting, so you have this wrestling. If they set goals, that's cool, right? But kids, maybe no different than when we were. That for some kids, goals have been then used and manipulated. Adults have then used goals against the kids when they've set goals. So then kids were like, yeah, I hope I'm 500. Because,
or they say stuff that they don't believe in.
Yeah, because it's been used against them, right? I think it is important to set goals, from that end, just to go through the journey of doing that, the practice of doing that. But I also think it's just you setting up certain initiatives in the practice room, right? You told me about the pull-up initiative, right? Setting up certain things like that, setting up certain normal skills, but then also the whole time you're knowing this is you're not only developing them physically, but you're also developing them mentally, emotionally, and spiritually by developing their character, who they are when no one's watching. That was the refrigerator deal, right?
Yeah.
It's a strawberry story. Who was I going to be when no one's watching me? There was no video cameras back then, right? So, and so that part of it, how do you show or bring them through that they can push farther this time? Kind of like what your coaches did at U of I, is that, how did you help them? How did those assistants help you? Now, just don't focus that you got 12 more to go. Focus just on this one. Well, that's those mentors and helpers showing you how to get through it so that you don't have to give up.
Yeah.
And I think those are all those key components that happen. It's kind of like my kids are finishing up this semester in college, right? And for my daughter, this is the first semester she was away at school, and so there was, before she left, well, Dad, I'm going to probably be calling you, because I'm the one who helps her out with her homework, and things like that. Well, the semester's, she has one more paper to do, and it's all she's done, right? And there was a couple times that she called, but not as many as I thought there would be. There was a couple things that she wanted to go over when she brought him back home and wanted me to check over, but not anywhere near what I thought it would be. And and she had some struggles. So, one class, the very first test she got back, she failed it, and she thought she studied really well with it. And then my son gave her, she's a sophomore in college, he's graduating from college, and he would point out a couple things that he did. I think that's all part of what happens in that initiation phase. No one could do it for her, but we could give some suggestions, and she had to make it her own. And I think those are all part of setting up that container, creating that space for them to face whatever fears they have. Maybe it could be asking them what their fears are. It's hard, though, at that age, for them to be able to articulate it. I don't know if you've heard this story before. This was a story that I was told when I first started doing men's work back in the 90s. It was about, I think it's a true story, about when the anthropologists went over and studied the Aboriginals in Australia, and they watched them, that they had this certain ritual that they would do from boyhood to manhood. And so at a certain age of the boys, because up until this point, the boys were primarily raised by their mothers, and their moms would be with them, the majority of the time, 90% of the time, and the fathers would come in and do whatever. But at a certain age, let's say 12, 13, 14 years old, whatever it was, they would then come in the middle of the night. These masked men would come and take them from their mothers, where they were sleeping and where the mothers were, and they would take them, and they would almost like a kidnapping of them, right? And they would take them away, and then the women, of course, would then all grab weapons and stuff like that, and go after the men, and try to get their boys back. And then the men would push them back, and they would go back and forth, and of course the men would win, and the women would then get pushed back, and then the men took the boys off to another place, away from the women, another place. And then the women, of course, would then sit and have coffee and tea and talk about how well they did in their act, because it was important for the boys to know that the women were the gatekeepers, but they were in on it. They knew that they had to be taken away. They had to be taken from their boyhood to go into this phase. And then when they were there, right, there were different things that would happen, right? For example, that the boys would be lined up, and then the men, the older men, would then have them go through a series of different aspects. But primarily, the whole point of it was of them being around in ordinary circumstances and extraordinary circumstances, being around adult males who were men, so that they could show and demonstrate and model the male mode of feeling. at some certain point, when they became of age, what happened was that there was this element where there would be, maybe it would be a tooth would get knocked out, or a tattoo would happen, or some kind of scarification, or whatever would happen. But it happened as you were now part of, you were now, this symbol was now that you were a man. And now that when they went back home, right, when they went back to the village, they no longer were a boy, but they now were something more. I think outside of certain elements and certain arenas, we're lacking that today. We're lacking that. Well, we're definitely lacking the formalized ritual piece. I think there's opportunities that come through maybe sport or art that can help an initiation process, but sometimes it is going to be certain things in training, but it's also going to be when riding on the bus to the meet and something happens, and how does the coaches handle it? When they have something happens, that you can't even plan, and they get to see how, just as your assistants see you lead them, they get to watch and go, how. So Coach Dalton does that. Okay, so then I can do that. That's how you handle that.
Yeah, I love the story. I think the stuff that I've talked to you about coaching in the suburbs, it was so much like that. Mm-hmm. It's why I'm trying to build some type of gym or facility, so that there can be periods of time that you can dedicate to going away. It's hard. It's so hard to expect dramatic results if every single night after practice or after the day's over with, there's like a reset back into the patterns and behaviors that are continuing the lack of development. Mm-hmm. I think the greatest gift that my parents gave me was the fact that they gave me away to my coaches. Mm-hmm. They said, "All right, take them." Yeah. They took me across the country to national tournaments for weeks at a time. Mm-hmm. They were like big older brothers, if I expressed what, it probably would be frowned upon by most of society, right? But they did it all out of love, and they were always trying to make me stronger, both physically and mentally, and open my eyes up to things. So how do we get that type of a ritual to be embraced, encouraged? I guess creating it is hard, is the one aspect, but
well, I think there's a couple different ways of doing it, right? I think, you can set it up, and we do this in drug and alcohol treatment, right? We do this in mental health or behavioral health treatment, where a person goes away for a certain amount of time, or I've been involved and participated in weekend retreats, and there's those things that you can do that are a little bit more structured and a little bit more designed that way, where you're literally, that separation happens. And I think sometimes that's important to do, especially if someone is really entrenched and can't make that transition. But when you were just talking, I was thinking, for me, I had a similar experience, but mine was with bodybuilding, and I remember my going to the gym, right? At that time, it was Champions Gym, in Rockford, and it was whenever early 80s, and 82, 83, whenever it was when I joined, or it was 82 actually when I joined. And I remember going there with my dad, going there by myself, getting dropped off. I was only 14 years old, and you're supposed to be either 16 or 18 or whatever it was, and And I remember doing these workouts that I read in this bodybuilding magazine, whatever, Muscular Development or whatever it was called back then. And so I was doing 30 sets for chest. I was spending 3 hours a day, working out. And a guy came up to me and he says, "I see that you're really working hard. I see that you spend a lot of time in here. Tell me what you're doing for your workouts." And he said, "I got a suggestion for you. If you really want to get big, do this." And it was this routine he designed for me. My freshman year, I wrestled at 138, so I was about 140 at this time. A year later, I weighed 206. No steroids, just working out. I listened to what they said, and if they said to set your alarm for 2 o'clock in the morning to drink a protein drink, that's what I did. It didn't matter. I would do it, and I was regimented. And I remember my parents, us getting in arguments because we're going to Florida, and they, were on vacation in Disney World or whatever, and I wanted to work out. And then I started competing because one of those guys thought I had a chance to start competing and I could do well in this, and I didn't even know what that was, but I was around it. I saw them other guys doing it, and I was just I just so much admired what they were doing and how they looked and how I wanted to look like they did. And in that first show, I had no idea what I was doing, so I just listened to what they told me to do. But I could do that. I could be disciplined. I could sacrifice. And so I went from 206 to 154 in 8 weeks, and I competed in that first show. And surprise to me that I wasn't the only 15-year-old there, and I got third in that show. But what I learned from that, and disappointed and all that, even though I placed, that, and I continued, that was the beginning of me competing. But one of the things that happened was the beginning of that container, where I would go to the gym, listen to what these guys that had been there, are there, doing. I knew they had something that I wanted, and I wanted that. And I wasn't acting like a jackass, like a 15-year-old, because I didn't want them to not. So I would act older, or not act older, but listen, pay attention, not be a goofball or whatever. And because I didn't want them to go, "Oh, he's 15 years old." They never treated me as a younger person. They probably told me a lot of do as I say, and then kept from me what they were actually doing, but there was a lot of them feeding into me when I would compete for a show. 10 weeks out, 12 weeks out, stop hanging out with my friends, the diet was on. 6 weeks before the show, I wasn't, any girlfriend I had at the time, I was probably breaking up with them, and I just made my world all about that. And so I guess the reason why I bring that up is because I think there are ways to invite people into, if you want to be the best that you can be, well, here's a plan. Yeah. Here's a program.
When you say that, it only makes me more motivated and focused on trying to build a gym, because a gym has such a ability to create, like you said, that container of like the process of going there. Right, as long as the culture and the standards are the right culture and standards,
life-giving,
right. The process of going there, right? When you wake up and you go, "Oh, I'm gonna go to practice at 3 o'clock. Yeah, that's gonna be tough," right? Or even if you're not like dreading it, maybe you're anticipating it. On the way there, you're like, "Man, this is gonna be a hard day, easy day. What are we gonna do? I don't know. I'm just gonna go," right? And like the process of going to that place, as silly as it sounds, that process itself is part of that initiation into the experience, I guess. Yeah. So, when you say that stuff, it's just, that's why I want to build a gym, because there's no gym around here that can offer that for young people that want to become a champion wrestler, And I think that's, Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think that is part of it, and right in some ways, that right now is part of your call, right? That's part of what's happening, and you're in that phase regarding that initiative. That part of the initiative is about that call, or maybe you're already in the process. You just haven't. It's less about a building, and it's more about a mindset, right? And you're already in the initiation phase of how do I go about doing this, and so I think it is that, and it's how do you find these different ways, and for me, I look back on that time period, and yes, there was a handful of us that won national titles and more that won state titles and regional titles, but when I think about what I walked away with, those pieces of plastic that literally just got flooded underneath my basement last week, that wasn't really the point. The point was the whole journey. The point was what I learned along the way, because that's what's helped me in my career. That's what helped me when I've transformed my career into another career. That's what those building blocks were. Was what I learned then, and what I continued. And there were certain things that I didn't learn then that I had to go through the cycle again and go through the initiation process again. I was just talking. Last night I was talking with my wife and family about something that happened a few months ago, and it's this idea of being aware of where you're at. So I knew that I had this thing that I was hung up on financial insecurity, right? And in other words, I wasn't going to have enough, which meant that I wouldn't be able to take care of my family, my wife, and kids, which then meant that I wasn't good enough, or I didn't have what it took. So it goes back to that 12-year-old, right? It goes back to that way back, that thing. And so I would identify that fear, and I don't remember ever having that until I was married and had children. And it was when I was married and children, that's when it resurrected. And I think that came from some stuff in my own family of origin. With my mom and dad's dynamic, so I think I picked up that from my mom, from some of her stuff that she picked up from her family. So it's that when they talk about the sins of the father, probably a better way of would have said it would have been wounds of the father that never gets addressed and it passed on to the next generation. And there was this thing. I was having this conversation a few months ago with my wife and family about a particular thing about money, and it came out of my mouth that all throughout my career, I've always believed that there wasn't going to be a scarcity of people that I could help from counseling. That I didn't have to worry about this counsel agency opening up or that treatment center, that there's going to be enough people to help. And I just believed that. I just knew that. It was like a knowing. But on the other hand, I'd have this insecurity about somehow I'd get into debt or I wouldn't be able to dig my way out of it. And then, for whatever reason, that day, by verbalizing it, by talking about it for the first time and not having all this weird emotion around it, but just putting it out there and having this idea of, I have this scarcity thought about there not being enough money, but I believe there's an abundance of people that I can help, and that's how I actually get paid. It collided. There's incongruency. In that moment, it's, well, what do you believe, Kevin? Which is it? Is it there's not going to be enough people you can help? Or is it there is? And if it is that, then this is a falsehood. This isn't real. This is just something you came up with and you continue resurrecting, continue keeping alive. And at that moment, there was like this energy, or there was this release, and I was just, there was a peace about it. That doesn't mean there hasn't been times where it's resurrected itself, that there's this fear, and then I have to go back. Which is it? What do I believe? Abundance or scarcity? And each time I've had that challenge, to go back, I can frame it, and it goes back to that abundance, and I can navigate through. Because ultimately, I don't physically do anything different. It's just what I torture myself with worry. And I think that is another way of what happens on a small scale. What happens when you're facing that dragon, facing that fear? The dragon in that case was from the past.
Yeah.
I thought I had faced it head on, but it never got. It just was contained. It never got conquered.
Yeah.
And so
they'll keep presenting themselves until you deal with them.
Yeah, it'll keep presenting itself, and then even after it presents itself doesn't necessarily mean that I won't have those thoughts again, but now at least I have something to do with it. And I think that's what you teach your athletes, right? Yeah. So you lost.
Yeah.
Okay, what are we going to learn from it? What are you going to do different? Mm-hmm. Sometimes you're just going to run up against someone who's just better.
Yeah.
Okay, so that happens.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? Are you okay with how you wrestled? Not about the outcome, but how you wrestled?
Yeah. That's one of the things that comes up with that type of idea is, like, you're taught, like, to understand that every single person gets tired, right? Like, no matter what level they are, they get tired too. We all have the same physiology.
Yep.
It's the ones that don't allow that to affect their performance or their effort mentally, right? Because maybe they have to change how they compete, but they're not letting it affect them. So it's like, one, you start to realize that these things are not like these things are not things that you're trying to get rid of. No, they will continue to present themselves over and over again. It's your job to develop, I want to say, some type of coping skills so that you can embrace it as opposed to fear it and run from it.
Right.
You go, oh, I'm going to get tired right now. I don't care.
Right.
Or I'm getting stressed about finances. Oh, okay. Yeah, I feel it. Push it to the side.
Right.
So I think like we said, the initiation, the call, the hero's journey is happening to every single person, no matter what they think or feel.
Right.
It's happening.
Yeah.
And in the initiation phase, right, it's constantly presenting stuff for you to point out so that you can address, so that you can move forward.
Yeah.
And that's why life, I think, is much like sports. It goes in these waves. But I think what beautiful thing about the hero's journey and why I'm so pumped about you sharing it is, like, it's literally what Joseph Campbell said it was. It's a way for people to make sense of their experience. Mm-hmm. Their experience is the hero's journey. It's a constant, up and down, or in this case, a circle. It's constant circular pattern of your experiences, whether it's just sports or going into career or family or relationship or health, mm-hmm. right? Every single thing that you're doing is calling you into action. And then along that call is, this initiation where it's presenting, like, doubt, fear, insecurities, etc. And you have to find a way to deal with those things.
Right.
And they'll come up again, and they'll come up again. But when you conquer them, when you address them, when you deal with them, when you face them head on, that's when the next phase comes in, and that's where all the magic happens.
Yeah, I agree. And just as we get ready to wrap up with this, it's just this whole journey of the Journey podcast has been part of this initiation. We talked about it, had the ideas about it, and then at some point, all right, we've bought enough equipment, we've done it, we've talked about it enough times, now we need to actually record. And that was what you said to me before. All right, we're going to get better as this goes on. We're going to learn more things about it. it. And so, as I've heard this said by someone before, who made a film about Joseph Campbell's work, similar to The Journey, is about the hero's journey itself. And we are in that phase of, well, we don't know what we're doing. We're just talking and just having a conversation about it and inviting people into the ordinariness of that and the normalcy of that, but also finding that there's a lot more special and extraordinary within us if we can just touch it and let it be. So, Dalton, once again, thank you for being here, and we will continue our journey together, but also continue talking about this because we need to talk about the third phase of returning home with the gold that comes from the initiation.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Right.
Yeah, good one.